Most people think repeating numbers are messages. But what if the number is not the message at all? What if 111, 222, 333, 444 and 555 are not answers, but interruptions? A knock on your attention, a pause in the middle of your day, a small pattern appearing at the exact moment you were about to ignore something important. Because that is the strange part, isn't it? It is not just that you see the number, it is when you see it. You are thinking about someone, and suddenly the clock says 11:11. You are about to send a message, and the time is 2:22. You are questioning a decision, and 555 appears on a receipt, a number plate, a video length, or a phone screen. At first, you tell yourself it is nothing, just coincidence. But then it happens again, and again. Not loudly, not dramatically, just often enough to make you stop. And that stop is where the real mystery begins. Because repeating numbers may not be there to tell you exactly what will happen next. They may be there to show you where your awareness is being redirected. Not away from reality, deeper into it. Most people ask, what does this number mean? But the better question is, what did this number interrupt? What were you thinking? What were you avoiding? Who were you with? What decision was circling underneath the surface? What truth had you almost talked yourself out of noticing? Because the number may be the visible marker, but the real message is often hidden in the moment around it. Now this is the bit that matters. Once you understand that, repeating numbers stop being random little spiritual signs. They become a system, a way your attention gets pulled toward the part of your life that is shifting before you fully admit it. So in this video, we are not going to repeat the same angel number meanings you have heard 100 times. This is not just 111 means new beginnings, 222 means balance, 333 means support, 444 means protection, 555 means change. Those meanings can be useful, but they are only the surface. Today we are going beneath them. We are looking at why repeating numbers often appear during life transitions, emotional endings, identity shifts, relationship uncertainty, manifestation blocks, and those strange in-between periods where something feels different before anything has visibly changed. Because the number may not be the answer, it may be the doorway, and what waits behind it is often the truth you were not quite ready to name. 1. Why repeating numbers appear when life becomes uncertain. Have you noticed that repeating numbers often appear more during uncertain phases? Not always when everything is peaceful, often when life feels slightly unstable. A relationship is changing, a job no longer feels right, a friendship has gone quiet. You feel restless without knowing why. You are waiting for clarity. You are trying to make a decision, or you feel as though something invisible is moving beneath the surface of your life. This is where repeating numbers often begin to increase. And yes, there is a simple explanation. The human brain looks for patterns. Once a number gets your attention, you are more likely to notice it again. That is true. But that does not make the experience meaningless, because attention itself is meaningful. What catches your attention during a transition can reveal what part of you is becoming alert. When life is stable, the mind runs on routine. You move through the day almost automatically. You respond to familiar people, repeat familiar thoughts, make familiar choices, live inside familiar emotional patterns. But when life begins to shift, routine starts to crack. Your awareness becomes more sensitive. You begin scanning for signs. Not because you are foolish, not because you are desperate, but because your inner system is looking for orientation. That is what people often misunderstand. Seeing repeating numbers does not always mean something supernatural is shouting at you from outside your life. Sometimes it means something deeper inside you is no longer willing to stay asleep. The number interrupts the trance. It stops the automatic movement. It creates a small break in the pattern. And in that break, something can be noticed. A feeling, a thought, a fear, a truth, a decision, a desire that keeps returning. So the first hidden rule is this: repeating numbers often appear when your awareness is being redirected toward a change already forming inside you. Not always a visible change, an internal one. And internal change nearly always begins before external life catches up. That is why you may see numbers before the breakup, before the move, before the career shift, before the conversation, before the realization fully lands. The number may not be predicting the future. It may be marking the moment when part of you already knows the old pattern is weakening. And oh gosh, that can feel unsettling. Because sometimes the soul recognizes change before the personality is ready to deal with it. 2. The number is the knock, not the whole message. This is the mistake almost everyone makes with repeating numbers. They see 111 or 222 or 555 and immediately ask, what does it mean? Then they search for a fixed definition, and that can be comforting for a moment. But fixed meanings can also flatten the experience, because the same number can appear to different people for completely different reasons. 111 might appear to one person when a new beginning is forming, but for someone else it might appear when they need to notice a repeated thought becoming powerful. 222 may appear during a relationship question, but for another person it may point to inner conflict. 444 may feel like protection, but sometimes protection begins by exposing the weak foundation you have been standing on. 555 may signal change, but the deeper question is, what has already changed inside you? That is why context matters. The number is the knock, the moment is the message. And this changes everything, because if you only stare at the digits, you may miss what the signal was trying to show you. You may see 222 while thinking about someone who drains you. But instead of noticing the imbalance, you search for the meaning and read, "Everything is in harmony." Then you ignore the actual signal. You may see 555 after admitting privately that a situation is over. But instead of listening to that truth, you search for reassurance that good change is coming. You may see 444 during a time when your life feels unstable. But instead of asking what foundation needs strengthening, you treat it only as comfort. Now, comfort has its place. Of course it does. But clarity matters too. So here is the question to use every time a repeating number appears. What was this number interrupting? That is the key. What thought, what emotion, what fear, what fantasy, what conversation, what memory, what decision? Because repeating numbers often appear at the seam between what you say you believe and what you actually feel, the seam between the story you tell yourself and the truth underneath, the seam between the old identity and the new one trying to form. So do not only ask what the number means, ask what it interrupted. That is where the useful information begins. 3. 111. The first break in an old pattern. Why does 111 often appear when something new is trying to begin? Most people call 111 the number of new beginnings, but let's make it more precise. 111 often appears when the first break in an old pattern becomes visible. Not the whole new life, not the finished answer, the first break, a thought that keeps returning, a quiet idea, a new desire, a sudden unwillingness to keep doing something the old way, a strange pull toward a different future. At first it can look tiny. That is why people ignore it. They expect beginnings to feel dramatic. But real beginnings often arrive as a disturbance in attention. You keep thinking about something. You keep feeling drawn to a subject, a place, a person, a decision, or a different rhythm of life. You try to dismiss it. Then you see 111. And maybe the message is not, everything is about to magically change. Maybe it is, do not ignore the first thread. Because the first thread is how a new pattern begins. This matters because many people destroy beginnings before they have time to form. They talk themselves out of the impulse. They call it unrealistic. They ask too many people for opinions. They compare it to the old life. They demand proof before the new direction has had time to breathe. But new patterns are fragile in the beginning. 111 may appear when something inside you is trying to separate one clear line from the noise. That line may be an idea, a boundary, a creative pull, a decision you keep postponing, a truth you keep circling. So, when 111 appears, ask this: what new pattern is trying to form? And then ask, what old pattern keeps interrupting it? That second question matters, because 111 is not only about beginning, It is also about noticing what keeps dragging you back. A new life does not start just because you want one. It starts when the old pattern loses authority. And 111 often appears at that exact point. The moment a different future becomes visible enough to disturb the old one. 4. 222. When inner conflict becomes impossible to ignore. Why does 222 appear so often during relationship confusion, emotional uncertainty, or waiting periods? People often say 222 means balance, trust, harmony, and patience. And yes, it can. But the deeper mechanism is more uncomfortable. 222 often appears when inner conflict can no longer be ignored. One part of you wants peace. Another part wants truth. One part wants to stay. Another part is already tired. One part wants to believe someone. Another part keeps noticing the pattern. One part wants to be patient. Another part knows patience has become self-abandonment. That is the hidden side of 222. It does not always mean everything is balanced. Sometimes it appears because something is not, and your inner system is trying to show you the split. This is why 222 can appear during complicated relationships. You may be giving more than you receive, explaining more than you are heard, waiting for someone to become who they briefly appeared to be, or holding a connection together by making yourself smaller. Then 222 appears, and many people read it as stay calm, trust the process. But what if the real signal is notice where peace is costing you your honesty? That is very different, because balance is not always gentle. Sometimes balance requires a difficult adjustment, a boundary, a pause, a conversation, a refusal to keep pretending. 222 may be asking you to restore inner agreement, to stop saying yes externally while something inside you is quietly saying no, to stop calling confusion patience when your deeper awareness has already collected enough evidence. So when 222 appears, ask, where am I divided inside myself? And what am I calling peace that is actually avoidance? That is the kind of question that changes the meaning from generic reassurance into real self-recognition. Because sometimes the soul does not signal to calm you down. Sometimes it signals to bring you back into alignment with what you already know. Number 5. 333. When guidance turns into responsibility. Why does 333 often appear when you are waiting for help, confirmation, or support? 333 is usually linked with guidance, support, creativity, encouragement, or spiritual assistance. But there is a sharper truth underneath it. 333 often appears when guidance turns into responsibility. That sounds less comforting, I know, but it is much more useful. Because many people wait for signs as though signs will remove the need for action. They want clarity before movement, confidence before beginning, a guarantee before commitment, a sign so strong that they will never have to risk being wrong. But life rarely works that way. Sometimes the help has already arrived. It arrived as an idea, a repeated pull, a person offering a doorway, an opportunity you keep postponing, a creative urge that will not leave you alone, a quiet instruction you keep asking to receive again, even though you already heard it the first time. 333 may appear when support is present, but your participation is now required, not later, now. This is where it becomes practical. If you see 333, do not only ask, who is supporting me? Ask, what am I being asked to participate in? What conversation needs your voice? What work needs your discipline? What gift needs your courage? What next step have you spiritualized because you are afraid to begin? Oh gosh, this happens so often. People ask for guidance, receive a clear inner nudge, then ask for another sign because the first one required action. 333 may be the moment the signal changes from comfort to activation. It says, you are not unsupported, but also you cannot outsource your own becoming. That is not harsh, it is honest. Support is not always rescue. Sometimes support is the energy that meets you when you finally move. And 333 often appears when the waiting phase has gone on long enough. Number 6, 444. When weak foundations get exposed. Why does 444 appear when life feels unstable? That seems strange at first, because 444 is often seen as a number of protection, angels, stability, reassurance, and being watched over, and it can be deeply comforting. But protection is not always soft. Sometimes protection begins by exposing what cannot hold. This is the deeper pattern of 444. It often appears when foundations are being tested, your routines, your boundaries, your relationships, your self-trust, your finances, your emotional habits, your nervous system, your ability to say no, your ability to stop abandoning yourself under pressure. People love the idea of protection, but they do not always love the rebuilding protection requires. Because if you are asking for a bigger life, a deeper relationship, more visibility, more peace, more prosperity, or a more truthful path, then the structure beneath you has to become strong enough to hold it. Otherwise, the blessing becomes pressure. More love without boundaries can become dependency. More money without structure can become chaos. More visibility without self-trust can become anxiety. More purpose without rest can become burnout. So 444 may not simply mean you are safe. It may mean strengthen what safety requires. That is a powerful difference. And sometimes this number appears during delays, closed doors, or frustrating pauses. Not because you are being punished, but because the foundation is not ready for the weight of the next phase. So when 444 appears, ask, what is being strengthened right now? And also, what weak structure can no longer come with me? This question can apply to practical life, emotional life, spiritual life, relationships, work, and even health. Because protection is not just something that surrounds you, it is also something that gets built inside you. The stronger the inner structure, the less easily life can pull you back into old patterns. That may be the hidden message of 444. Not just protection above you, foundation beneath you. Number 7. 555. When the internal ending has already happened. Why does 555 often appear before life changes visibly? People usually say 555 means change, but the deeper truth is this. 555 often appears when the change has already happened internally. Your outer life may still look the same. Same home, same job, same relationship, same routine, same conversations. But inside, something has moved. You cannot enjoy the old dynamic in the same way. You cannot ignore the same behaviour as easily. You cannot force enthusiasm for something that used to matter. You cannot fully return to who you were. That is why 555 can feel exciting and frightening at the same time. Because the internal ending has begun before the external life has caught up. And that in-between phase is deeply uncomfortable. People often call it anxiety. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it is transition pressure. The pressure of knowing something is over before you are ready to rearrange your life around that truth. This is why 555 may appear when you are still pretending. Pretending the relationship feels the same. Pretending the job is fine. Pretending the dream still fits. Pretending you do not know what you know. Then 555 appears. Not always as a prediction, sometimes as confirmation that the movement has already started. So do not ask only, what change is coming? Ask, what has already changed inside me? That question is far more revealing, because often the first change is not external, it is tolerance. Your tolerance changes. You stop tolerating confusion. You stop tolerating being used. You stop tolerating false peace. You stop tolerating the version of yourself that survived by staying quiet. And once tolerance changes, life eventually has to reorganize. That is the real power of 555. It often marks the stage where an old pattern can no longer negotiate with your deeper knowing. Number 8. Why numbers often increase before endings. Have you noticed repeating numbers appearing more intensely before endings? Before a breakup? Before a move? Before leaving a job? Before a friendship fades? before a family pattern shifts, before an identity change. This is one of the most common experiences people mention quietly. The numbers seem to gather around the edge of a chapter. And again, this does not mean every number predicts loss. Please do not turn signs into fear. That is not useful. But endings create heightened awareness. Even before the conscious mind admits something is ending, the deeper self often knows. The body knows. The nervous system knows. Your emotional responses change. Your energy pulls back. Your dreams may shift. Your patience becomes thinner. Your intuition becomes harder to silence. And in that heightened state, numbers can become markers. Not because they are forcing the ending, but because they are appearing at the edge of your awareness as something already begins to change. Sometimes you see 111 before you begin a new direction. Sometimes 222 appears when you are divided about whether to stay. Sometimes 444 appears when the old foundation begins to crack. Sometimes 555 appears when the ending has already begun internally. The number is not the cause, it is the marker. And this is why the context matters so much. If repeating numbers increase around an ending, ask, what am I already preparing to release? And what truth am I trying not to call an ending yet? That may sound uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing, because some endings are not punishments. Some endings are the final removal of a pattern that has been draining you quietly for years. Some endings are mercy. Some endings are protection. Some endings are the moment your future stops asking permission from your past. That is why numbers around endings can feel so emotionally charged. They are not always saying something bad is coming. Sometimes they are saying, stop abandoning your knowing. Number 9. Why numbers appear around manifestation blocks. Why do repeating numbers often appear when people are trying to manifest something? A relationship, money, healing, purpose, a new life, a breakthrough. This is where many people get confused. They see numbers and assume the manifestation is guaranteed. But repeating numbers may not always be saying, it is coming. Sometimes they are saying, look at what is blocking compatibility. That is less glamorous, but far more useful. Because receiving something new requires more than desire. It requires an internal structure that can hold it. You may want love, but still feel unsafe being truly seen. You may want money, but feel guilty receiving more than you are used to. You may want success, but fear visibility. You may want peace, but keep returning to chaos because chaos feels familiar. So when numbers appear during manifestation, do not only treat them as confirmation, treat them as diagnostic markers. 111 may ask, what new pattern are you actually willing to begin? 222 may ask, where are you divided about receiving this? 333 may ask, what participation is now required? 444 may ask, what foundation must be strengthened first? 555 may ask, what old identity has to end for this to fit? That is where repeating numbers become genuinely helpful. They stop being little tokens of reassurance. They become mirrors. And sometimes the mirror shows why the thing you want has not fully arrived yet. Not because you are unworthy, not because you failed, but because some part of your old structure is still incompatible with what you are asking for. That is an empowering interpretation, because it gives you something to work with, a pattern to notice, a belief to question, a boundary to build, a step to take, a truth to admit. Manifestation without self-awareness can become fantasy, but manifestation with pattern recognition becomes preparation, and repeating numbers may be one of the ways your attention gets pulled toward the preparation stage.